My name is Claire, and I'm 28 years old. Right now, I'm sitting in a lawyer's office, staring at a folder that contains 10 years of bank statements I've never seen before. My hands won't stop shaking. The lawyer just finished explaining that I've been defrauded of over $200,000. The person who stole it? My own mother. She's been cashing my disability checks since I turned 18, and I trusted her with everything. And the worst part? I never suspected a thing until 3 weeks ago. Before we dive into how I discovered the truth and what happened next, I want to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. If this story resonates with you, or if you've ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. You won't believe how this unfolds. And trust me, you'll want to stick around for what my family did when I finally confronted them. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. I was 17 when the accident happened. It was a Friday night in October, and I was driving home from a football game with two friends. We were laughing, singing along to the radio, completely carefree. Then, out of nowhere, headlights swerved into our lane. A drunk driver hit us head-on at 50 miles per hour. I remember the sound of crunching metal, the feeling of my body jerking forward despite the seatbelt, and then nothing. I woke up 3 days later in intensive care with my mother Patricia sitting beside my hospital bed, her face pale and drawn. She grabbed my hand when she saw my eyes open and started crying, telling me how scared she'd been, how she thought she'd lost me. At that moment, I believed she was the most devoted mother in the world. The doctors explained my injuries in clinical terms that I barely understood through the fog of pain medication. I had severe spinal damage, fractured vertebrae, and nerve compression that would cause chronic pain for the rest of my life. They said I'd need multiple surgeries, years of physical therapy, and I might never walk normally again. I was 17 years old, and my entire future had just been rewritten. My father Howard showed up at the hospital eventually, but he seemed more annoyed than concerned. He kept asking about insurance coverage, about how much the hospital stay would cost, about whether our policy would cover everything. He barely looked at me. My older brother Vincent visited once, stayed for maybe 15 minutes, and spent most of that time on his phone. When he left, he didn't even say goodbye. But Mom was there constantly. She slept in the chair beside my bed, helped me to the bathroom when I could barely move, and promised me that everything would be okay. 6 months of rehabilitation followed. I had to relearn how to walk, how to manage pain, how to function with a body that no longer worked the way it used to. The physical therapists were patient but firm, pushing me when I wanted to give up. There were days I cried from the pain, days I wished I'd died in that accident. Mom was always there, encouraging me, telling me I was strong, telling me she'd take care of everything. When I turned 18, halfway through my recovery, a social worker came to explain disability benefits. She said I qualified for monthly payments because my injuries would prevent me from working full-time for the foreseeable future. The checks would help cover medical expenses, living costs, and give me some financial stability. I barely understood what she was saying. I was still taking heavy pain medication, still struggling to process what my life had become. That's when Mom made her suggestion. She said I should focus entirely on my recovery and let her handle the financial side of things. She said it would be too stressful for me to manage money while dealing with chronic pain and ongoing treatment. She said she'd make sure every penny went toward my care. She asked me to sign some papers giving her power of attorney over my accounts. I didn't hesitate. Why would I? She was my mother. She'd been taking care of me since the accident. I trusted her completely. I signed everything she put in front of me without reading it, without asking questions, without realizing I was handing her complete control over my financial life. The first disability check arrived a month later. I never saw it. I never saw any of them. The next 7 years blurred together in my memory like a fog I couldn't see through. I moved back home after rehabilitation because I had nowhere else to go and no money to live independently, or so I thought. I asked Mom about my disability payments several times during those years, especially when I wanted to take online classes or buy things I needed. Her answers were always the same, delivered with a tone of patient martyrdom that made me feel guilty for even asking. Shed sigh and explain that all the money was going toward my medical bills, that insurance didn't cover everything, that the specialized equipment I needed was expensive. Shed remind me how much Shed sacrificed to take care of me. How Shed put her own life on hold to be my caregiver. I'd feel ashamed for questioning her and drop the subject. Meanwhile, I started noticing changes in our family's lifestyle. Vincent showed up one day driving a brand new truck, a huge black Ford with all the upgrades. When I asked how he afforded it, Mom said he'd been working hard and saved up. It seemed plausible, though I'd never known Vincent to be particularly responsible with money. Then my parents started taking vacations without me, trips to places like Hawaii and California. When I asked how they could afford these trips when my medical bills were supposedly draining our resources, Mom said they'd been saving for years and deserved a break from the stress of caring for me. Again, I felt guilty for questioning her. The house got renovated too, with new kitchen cabinets, new flooring, and a completely remodeled master bathroom. Mom explained that they'd taken out a loan, that it had nothing to do with my money. I believed her because I needed to believe her. The alternative was too painful to consider. I tried once to take an online course in graphic design. It'd always been artistic before the accident, and I thought maybe I could build some kind of career I could do from home. When I asked Mom if there was any money available for the course fee, which was only $300, she looked at me with such sadness and disappointment. She said there was nothing left, that every penny had gone to keeping me alive and functional, that I was being selfish for asking for more when Shed already given me everything. I felt about 2 inches tall. I apologized and never brought it up again. That's how she controlled me, with guilt and manipulation disguised as sacrifice and love. My world became smaller and smaller. I had no friends because Mom said I was too sick for visitors and that other people wouldn't understand my limitations. I had no independence because Mom insisted on driving me to every appointment, managing every medication, controlling every aspect of my daily life. I had no privacy because Shed checked my phone, read my emails, and monitor everything I did online when she occasionally let me use the computer. I started to believe what she constantly implied, that I was a burden, that I was lucky to have a family willing to put up with me, that I'd never be able to function on my own. My self-esteem disintegrated. Depression set in, heavy and suffocating. I spent most days in my room, managing pain, watching television, and trying not to think about how my life had turned out. Then one day, I tried to call the Social Security office. I'm not even sure what prompted it. Maybe just a flicker of the person I used to be, the girl who asked questions and expected answers. I found the number online and dialed it from the house phone when I thought Mom was outside. She caught me mid-conversation with a very confused representative. Mom's face transformed into something I'd never seen before. Pure rage barely contained beneath a veneer of wounded maternal concern. She grabbed the phone from my hand and hung it up, then turned on me with fury in her eyes. She shouted that after everything Shed done for me, after all her sacrifices, I was going behind her back and treating her like a criminal. She said I was ungrateful, paranoid, and clearly too mentally unstable to handle my own affairs. She said if I ever tried something like that again, Shed have me declared incompetent and put in a facility. That threat terrified me into silence. I apologized profusely, convinced myself it'd been wrong to doubt her, and retreated further into my isolated existence. The gaslighting intensified after that incident. Mom would make comments about how my medications were affecting my mind, how I was confused and couldn't understand complex things like finances, how I needed to trust her because she knew what was best. I started to doubt my own thoughts and perceptions. Maybe I was incompetent. Maybe I was mentally unstable. Maybe I should just be grateful and stop asking questions. I stopped questioning anything. I stopped hoping for anything different. I just existed, day after day, in a prison I couldn't even see. Everything changed the week I turned 28. My father's father, Grandpa Walter, came to visit from Arizona where he'd retired. Walter was 76 years old, a retired accountant with a sharp mind and an even sharper eye for inconsistencies. Had always been kind to me, though I rarely saw him since he lived so far away. This visit was supposed to be a quick stopover on his way to visit some old friends on the East Coast. Mom seemed nervous about his arrival, though she covered it with excessive cheerfulness and fussing over dinner preparations. She made a big production of setting the table, cooking an elaborate meal, and instructing Vincent and Dad to be on their best behavior. Dinner was tense, despite Mom's forced gaiety. She dominated the conversation, talking endlessly about how well she was taking care of me, how demanding it was to be a full-time caregiver, how she'd dedicated her life to my well-being. Walter listened quietly, watching everything with those sharp accountant's eyes. I could see him observing the expensive furniture, the renovated kitchen, Vincent's designer clothes, Mom's new jewelry. He looked at me too, really looked at me in a way nobody else had in years. I must have appeared terrible, thin and withdrawn and defeated. After dinner, Mom and Dad retreated to the kitchen. Vincent disappeared to his room. Walter sat beside me on the couch and asked me gently how I was really doing. I gave him the standard answer I'd learned to give, that I was fine, that Mom took good care of me, that I was managing. But Walter didn't accept that. He asked about my life, what I did with my days, whether I had any hobbies or interests or plans for the future. I found myself admitting things I'd never said out loud before. I told him I wished I could take some online courses, maybe learn graphic design or web development, something I could do despite my physical limitations. I mentioned that I'd asked about it once, but there wasn't any money available. Walter's expression changed immediately. He set down his coffee cup very carefully and asked me what I meant by no money. I explained, confused by his tone, that Mom had told me all my disability payments went to medical bills and there was nothing left. Then Walter asked the question that would change everything. He looked me directly in the eyes and said, "Claire, have you ever actually seen your bank statements?" Time seemed to stop. I stared at him, my mind suddenly racing. I realized with dawning horror that no, I'd never seen a single statement. I'd never logged into an online account. I'd never received mail about my benefits. I'd never signed a tax return. I'd never even seen a check with my name on it. I told Walter this in a shaky voice, and I watched his face harden into an expression of cold anger. He was an accountant for 40 years before retirement. He knew exactly what that meant. Walter started asking more questions in a calm, methodical voice that barely concealed his fury. How much did I receive monthly? I didn't know. Did I have my own bank account? I thought so, but I'd never accessed it. Who handled all my paperwork? Mom did. Had I signed anything recently? Not that I could remember. With each answer, Walter's jaw got tighter. Finally, he stood up and walked to the kitchen door. I heard him call Mom's name, his voice hard and commanding in a way that made her come immediately. He asked her to show him my bank statements, right now. Her face went pale, then flushed with anger. She demanded to know what business it was of his. He said he was making it his business. She told him to stay out of family matters. He said he wouldn't leave until he saw proof that my money was being used for my care. Their voices escalated. Dad appeared, looking nervous and guilty. Vincent came downstairs, immediately aggressive and defensive. Mom refused to show any documentation, claimed it was private, accused Walter of poisoning my mind against her. Walter stood his ground. He turned to me and said something that felt like a life raft thrown to a drowning person. He said, "Claire, pack a bag. You're coming with me." Mom exploded. She threatened to call the police for kidnapping. Vincent moved toward Walter in a physically threatening way. Dad tried to play peacemaker, but his hands were shaking and his voice was weak. The whole scene spiraled into chaos, shouting and accusations and threats flying back and forth. Then Walter dropped the bomb that made Mom's face turn white. He said Head already called Adult Protective Services from his hotel that afternoon. Head called them because he suspected financial exploitation, and they'd advised him that I had every right to leave with him if I chose to. He looked at me and asked if I wanted to leave. For the first time in 10 years, someone was giving me a choice, treating me like an adult capable of making decisions. My heart pounded. My hands shook. I looked at Mom's furious face, at Dad's guilty expression, at Vincent's barely contained violence. Then I looked at Walter's steady, kind eyes. I said yes. I wanted to leave. What happened next was a blur of motion and shouting. I grabbed my medications, some clothes, and my important documents, while Mom screamed that I was making the biggest mistake of my life. Vincent physically blocked the door until Walter pulled out his phone and dialed 911. That's when Dad finally intervened, moving Vincent aside and opening the door. As Walter helped me to his rental car, Mom's voice followed us, no longer maternal but vicious and threatening. She screamed that I was ungrateful, that I'd regret this, that I'd come crawling back when I realized I couldn't survive without her. I was shaking so hard I could barely walk. But I got in that car, and for the first time in a decade, I left that house of my own free will. At Walter's hotel, I collapsed on the bed and cried harder than I'd cried since the accident. 10 years of suppressed emotions poured out while Walter sat in the chair across from me, patient and steady. When I finally calmed down enough to speak, he explained what he suspected based on his years as an accountant and what had observed. He believed Mom had been stealing my disability payments, possibly for years, possibly the entire time. He said what she'd done was called financial exploitation, and it was both a crime and grounds for a civil lawsuit. He promised we'd get to the bottom of it, that he'd help me figure out exactly what had happened, and that if his suspicions were correct, we'd make sure she was held accountable. The next morning, Walter took me to the Social Security office. The wait was long and the building was depressing, fluorescent lights buzzing over rows of plastic chairs filled with exhausted-looking people. When we finally met with a representative, a tired woman named Mrs. Patterson, Walter explained the situation calmly. I sat there feeling numb and disoriented while he did most of the talking. Mrs. Patterson pulled up my file on her computer, and I watched her expression change from bureaucratic indifference to concern. She asked me several questions to verify my identity, then turned her monitor so I could see it. My monthly benefit amount was $1,847. It had been deposited every single month for the past 10 years, starting when I turned 18. I did the math in my head, my stomach churning. That was over $221,000. Mrs. Patterson asked me how much of that money I'd received. I told her none, zero. I'd never seen a penny. She asked if I'd authorized anyone to receive payments on my behalf. I explained about signing the power of attorney papers when I was 18 and recovering from the accident, how Mom had said she'd manage everything for me. Mrs. Patterson pulled up more information and her lips pressed into a thin line. She said the account was actually in Patricia's name with me, listed only as a beneficiary. All deposits went directly to her personal checking account. It had been set up that way from the beginning. I felt dizzy. The room seemed to tilt. Walter put his hand on my shoulder to steady me. We left the Social Security office with printed documentation and a referral to a lawyer who specialized in financial exploitation cases. That afternoon, we met with an attorney named Marcus Garrison at his downtown office. Wait, I cannot use Marcus. Let me change that. We met with an attorney named Terrence Garrison at his downtown office. Mr. Garrison had silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He listened to our story without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. When we finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, "This is textbook financial exploitation. What your mother did is both a crime and a civil wrong. We can absolutely prosecute this." He explained the process in detail. We could file a police report for theft, fraud, and exploitation of a disabled person. We could also file a civil lawsuit to recover the stolen funds plus additional damages. He warned me that it would be difficult, and that my family would likely fight back hard. He asked me directly if I was prepared for that, if I was certain I wanted to move forward. I hesitated. Despite everything, despite 10 years of manipulation and control, the thought of pressing charges against my own mother made me feel sick. I said, "They're my family." Walter spoke up then, his voice firm. He said, "Family doesn't steal from family. What she did wasn't love, it was abuse." Those words broke something open inside me. I thought about 10 years of isolation, 10 years of being told I was incompetent and burdensome, 10 years of having my life stolen while my family lived well on money meant for my survival. I thought about Vincent's truck and Mom's vacations and the renovated house. I thought about asking for $300 for an online course, and being made to feel like a selfish monster for wanting something for myself. I looked at Mr. Garrison and said, "Yes, I want them held accountable for what they did." He nodded and started making phone calls right there in his office. That night, staying in Walter's hotel room, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with a decade of memories that suddenly looked completely different. Every kind word from Mom was revealed as manipulation. Every guilt trip was exposed as a control tactic. Every limitation Shed placed on me was designed to keep me dependent and isolated. I'd been a prisoner, and I'd never even known the bars existed. But now I knew. Now I understood. And there was no going back. The counterattack started on day 3. Patricia, Howard, and Vincent launched a coordinated smear campaign that would have been impressive if it hadn't been so vicious. They called every relative we had, spinning a story that painted me as mentally unstable and Walter as a manipulative outsider who'd brainwashed me. They told people I'd abandoned my devoted mother who'd sacrificed everything for me, that I was having some kind of breakdown, that Walter was after my disability money for himself. The lies spread through our extended family like wildfire. My phone started ringing constantly with angry relatives who didn't bother to hear my side of the story. My Aunt Diane, Patricia's younger sister, called me screaming. She said I was an ungrateful brat, that I had no idea how hard Patricia had worked to take care of me, that I was breaking her heart. I tried to explain about the bank statements, about the $200,000, but Diane talked over me. She said finances were complicated, and I probably just didn't understand how medical bills work. She hung up on me before I could respond. Then my Uncle Roger showed up at Walter's hotel, pounding on the door and demanding I come home immediately. Walter refused to let him in, speaking through the door calmly but firmly. Roger shouted that I was tearing the family apart, that Patricia was devastated, that I needed to stop this nonsense and apologize. Walter opened the door just wide enough to look Roger in the eye. He asked Roger a simple question. Had he seen my bank statements? Had he seen proof that my money was actually used for my care? Roger faltered, his bluster fading. He said that was between me and my mother, that he didn't need to see private financial documents to know Patricia was a good person. Walter said then this conversation was over, and he closed the door. Roger stood outside for another 10 minutes, alternating between threats and pleading, before finally leaving. I sat on the bed shaking, feeling like the whole world was against me. But Walter reminded me that truth wasn't a democracy. It didn't matter how many people believed Patricia's lies. The bank records would tell the real story. Patricia's next move was legal. She filed for a restraining order against Walter, claiming he was dangerous and had coerced me into leaving. The judge denied it after a brief hearing where Walter presented documentation of his concerns and I testified that I'd left voluntarily. But that wasn't Patricia's only strategy. Vincent started posting on social media, writing long emotional posts about how his disabled sister had been kidnapped by their grandfather and turned against the family. He shared old photos of me with Patricia, pictures that showed her smiling beside my hospital bed or helping me with physical therapy. The posts got hundreds of sympathetic comments from people who had no idea what was really happening. Old acquaintances from high school started messaging me, confused and concerned, asking if I was okay and if the family drama they were seeing online was true. I felt humiliated. My private nightmare was being broadcast to the world, and Patricia was controlling the narrative. I wanted to respond, to tell everyone the truth, but Mr. Garrison advised me to stay silent for now. He said anything I posted could be used against me later, and that the truth would come out in court where it mattered. It was torture to watch the lies spread and not be able to defend myself. Walter kept reminding me that the people who truly mattered, the people who would actually listen to evidence, would see the truth. Everyone else didn't matter. But it was hard to believe that when my phone was full of hateful messages from relatives and former friends. Patricia's most aggressive move came 2 weeks after I left. She filed an emergency petition claiming I was mentally incompetent and needed a legal guardian. She submitted documents to the court alleging that I had cognitive impairments from my accident and medication, that I couldn't make informed decisions about my own welfare, and that I was being exploited by Walter. She requested an emergency hearing to have herself appointed as my guardian, with full legal authority over my life. When Mr. Garrison called to tell me about it, I felt pure terror flood through my body. If a judge believed her, if I was declared incompetent, It'd lose everything. It'd be right back under her control, this time with legal authority backing her up. It felt like the walls were closing in. The competency hearing was scheduled quickly. Mr. Garrison prepared me extensively, explaining what questions it'd be asked and how to present myself. He said judges saw through manipulation tactics all the time, but I needed to stay calm and articulate. The morning of the hearing, I was so nervous I could barely eat. We arrived at the courthouse to find Patricia already there with her lawyer, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit that I'm sure she paid for with my money. She looked at me with what appeared to be maternal concern, but I could see the calculation in her eyes. This was her endgame. If she won this, it'd never escape. The hearing was brutal. Patricia's lawyer presented forged medical documents claiming I had significant cognitive deficits. He painted a picture of me as confused, easily influenced, and incapable of managing my own affairs. He called me poor Claire in a patronizing tone that made my skin crawl. Then he called my own doctor, Dr. Yoder, to testify. Dr. Yoder had been my physician for 6 years, and I'd always trusted him. Patricia's lawyer asked him leading questions about my pain medication, trying to suggest it impaired my judgment. But Dr. Yoder wasn't playing along. He stated clearly that while I had chronic pain and took medication to manage it, I was fully mentally competent and capable of making my own decisions. He said there was no medical basis for guardianship. Then Dr. Yoder dropped a bomb that made Patricia's face go ashen. He said he'd reviewed the medical documents submitted by Patricia's lawyer, and they'd been altered. Test results had been changed, diagnoses had been fabricated, and notes had been added that he'd never written. He said these were falsified records, and he was appalled that they'd been presented to the court. The judge's expression hardened. He questioned Patricia's lawyer sharply about where he'd obtained the documents. The lawyer stammered something about receiving them from his client. The judge looked at Patricia with obvious disgust. He denied the guardianship petition immediately, stating that there was no credible evidence of incompetency and that he was deeply troubled by the apparent document fraud. He warned Patricia that submitting false evidence to the court was perjury, and he was referring the matter to the district attorney. We walked out of that courthouse, and I felt like I could breathe for the first time in weeks. It was a small victory, but an important one. Patricia couldn't legally control me anymore, but she wasn't done fighting. As we left the building, she was standing on the courthouse steps. When she saw me, her mask finally dropped completely. She screamed at me in front of dozens of people, calling me an ungrateful bitch and shouting that after she'd wiped my ass for years, this was how I repaid her. People stared. Some recorded it on their phones. Mr. Garrison calmly kept walking, guiding me past her. But I turned back for just a moment and looked at the woman who'd called herself my mother. I saw nothing but rage and hatred on her face. No love, no concern, just fury at losing control. In that moment, I realized with absolute clarity that I'd never actually known her at all. The criminal investigation moved forward with Detective Morrison, a weathered cop in his 50s who specialized in financial crimes. He subpoenaed Patricia's bank records, and what he found was even worse than we'd suspected. The evidence was overwhelming and damning. Over 10 years, Patricia had used my disability money to fund an extravagant lifestyle. Vincent's truck had cost $45,000, paid entirely in cash from my account. The family vacation to Hawaii was $12,000, charged directly to a credit card that was paid off with my funds. The house renovations totaled $38,000. Patricia's designer handbags, jewelry, and clothes added up to thousands more. Every major purchase they'd made in the past decade had been funded by money meant for my survival. But Detective Morrison found something even more disturbing. He discovered emails and text messages between Patricia, Howard, and Vincent that proved they'd all known exactly what they were doing. Howard's emails to Patricia included phrases like, "Just keep her dependent and make sure she doesn't ask too many questions." Text messages between Patricia and Vincent were cruel beyond belief. Vincent had texted his mother things like, "Milk it while you can. She's too stupid to notice and easiest money we've ever made." Patricia had responded with laughing emojis. Detective Morrison showed me printouts of these messages in his office, and I had to run to the bathroom to throw up. The casual cruelty, the complete lack of regard for me as a human being, was more painful than any physical injury I'd ever sustained. Reading those messages did something to me, though. It brought a strange kind of clarity. I'd been holding on to this hope that maybe they'd loved me in some twisted way, that maybe they'd convinced themselves they were doing what was best for me. But those texts erased any remaining doubt. They'd seen me as nothing but a source of income, a cash cow to be exploited. They'd laughed about it. They'd planned it deliberately. They'd never loved me at all. And somehow, knowing that with absolute certainty made it easier to move forward. I didn't have to feel guilty anymore about holding them accountable. They deserved everything that was coming to them. Walter connected me with a disability rights organization where I met a caseworker named Lorraine, a fierce advocate in her 60s who'd been fighting for disabled people's rights for 30 years. Lorraine took one look at my case and her face set in determined lines. She said financial abuse of disabled adults was horrifyingly common and rarely prosecuted, but when there was evidence this clear, she'd make sure it went all the way. She introduced me to a support group for exploitation survivors, and that's where I met Maya and Terrence, two people who'd been through similar nightmares with their own families. Maya was 26, vibrant and funny despite having been exploited by her father for years. Terrence was 32, quiet and thoughtful, still recovering from his mother's theft of his benefits. Hearing their stories, I realized I wasn't alone. This wasn't some rare occurrence. It was a widespread problem that nobody talked about because the shame and family loyalty kept victims silent. But in that support group, we didn't have to be silent. We shared our experiences, our anger, our grief, and our determination to reclaim our lives. Maya became my first real friend in years. She taught me how to use a computer properly, how to navigate social media, how to do things online that I'd never been allowed to learn. She was patient with my questions and celebrated every small victory as I developed skills that most people learned as teenagers. With Walter's help, I opened my own bank account, one that only I could access. I applied for back payments from Social Security, explaining what had happened and requesting they redirect future payments to my new account. I found a small apartment that was wheelchair accessible and affordable, and Walter helped me with the deposit. I got a part-time remote job doing data entry, simple work I could do from home on my own schedule. The day I received my first paycheck, money I'd actually earned myself and that nobody could take from me, I cried. They were good tears this time, tears of pride and accomplishment and the first glimmers of real independence. But the criminal case was moving slowly. Patricia had hired an expensive defense attorney, probably with money she'd stolen from me, and he was doing everything possible to delay and obstruct. He filed motion after motion, challenging evidence, requesting continuances, trying to suppress the text messages and emails. Mr. Garrison explained that this was standard defense strategy, designed to exhaust us and make us willing to settle. Patricia's lawyer eventually approached us with a settlement offer. She'd pay back $50,000 and avoid jail time if we dropped the criminal charges. Mr. Garrison looked at me to gauge my reaction. I didn't hesitate. I said she'd stolen $221,000, and she needed to pay back every penny. More than that, I wanted her prosecuted. I wanted the truth on the public record. I wanted other victims to see that you could hold these people accountable. Mr. Garrison warned me that going to trial would be brutal. Patricia's lawyer would try to make me look bad, to paint Patricia as a devoted mother who'd made some mistakes in bookkeeping. He'd bring up my medication, my disability, anything he could use to make the jury sympathetic to her instead of me. I told him I didn't care. I'd been through 10 years of hell. I could survive a trial. Deep down, I think I needed the trial. I needed to tell my story in a place where people had to listen, where the truth had to come out, where Patricia couldn't control the narrative. Mr. Garrison nodded and told Patricia's lawyer we'd see them in court. 6 months into the legal process, I was starting to feel stronger. I had my own apartment, my own job, my own support system. I was going to therapy twice a week with Dr. Foster, working through a decade of trauma and learning to set healthy boundaries. I was learning to trust my own judgment again. Then my cousin Bethany reached out. Bethany was Patricia's niece, Diana's daughter, and we'd been close when we were kids. She sent me a long message on social media saying she'd heard what happened and she was so sorry. She said she'd always suspected something wasn't right about how Patricia treated me. She said she wanted to reconnect, to support me, to be the family I deserved. I was cautious at first, but Bethany was persistent and seemed genuine. She started visiting regularly, bringing coffee and pastries, asking about my life, listening to my story with appropriate shock and sympathy. She told me about her own struggles with her mother, Diane, about feeling like the family was toxic and she wanted to break free from it. She made me feel understood in a way that was deeply comforting. I started confiding in her, telling her about the case, about the evidence we had, about the strategy Mr. Garrison was planning for trial. She seemed supportive and encouraging. For a brief moment, I thought maybe I had one family member who actually cared about me. Then one afternoon, Bethany left her phone on my kitchen counter when she went to the bathroom. It buzzed with a text message, and I glanced at it instinctively. The preview showed it was from someone saved as Aunt P, and it said, "Did you find out what evidence they have?" My blood went cold. I picked up the phone with shaking hands and opened the conversation. Dozens of messages between Bethany and Patricia, dating back weeks. Bethany had been reporting everything I told her, every detail about the case, every legal strategy, every vulnerable thing I'd shared. Patricia had been coaching her on what questions to ask, what information to get. The most recent messages showed Bethany reporting our conversation from earlier that day, with Patricia responding, "Good work, keep me updated." When Bethany came out of the bathroom, I was holding her phone. Her face went pale, then defiant. I asked her how she could do this, how she could pretend to care about me while spying for Patricia. She dropped the fake sympathy immediately and said I was tearing the family apart, that somebody needed to look out for Patricia's interests. I said Patricia stole over $200,000 from me. Bethany said it was more complicated than that families were supposed to stick together, that I was being vindictive and cruel. I told her to get out. She left, and within minutes she'd blocked me on every platform. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Just when I thought I'd experienced every possible betrayal, my family found new ways to hurt me. I spiraled into depression harder than I'd fallen in months. I missed therapy appointments. I stopped answering Maya's calls. I lay in bed wondering if I'd ever be able to trust anyone again. If every person who showed me kindness was just another manipulation waiting to be revealed. The darkness was suffocating, pulling me down into a place where I wasn't sure I wanted to keep fighting. Walter noticed. He showed up at my apartment unannounced, let himself in with the spare key I'd given him, and found me still in bed at 2 in the afternoon. He didn't lecture me or tell me to snap out of it. He just sat in the chair beside my bed and started talking. He told me about his own sister, my great aunt, who'd stolen money from him 20 years ago when he was going through a divorce. He said she'd been family, and had trusted her, and she'd betrayed that trust without hesitation. He'd cut her out of his life completely, and it was one of the best decisions he'd ever made. He said blood didn't excuse abuse, that DNA didn't create obligation, that family was supposed to be people who built you up, not people who tore you down. He said something else that stuck with me. He said I hadn't lost a family because I'd never actually had one. What I'd had was a group of people who shared my genetics and exploited my vulnerability. But I was building a real family now, one based on mutual respect and genuine care. Maya, who taught me computer skills and made me laugh. Lorraine, who fought for my rights with fierce dedication. Dr. Foster, who helped me process trauma without judgment. Mr. Garrison, who believed me and fought for justice. And Walter himself, who'd asked the right question and stood by me through everything. Those were my real family. Everyone else was just DNA. His words helped pull me out of the darkness. I went back to Dr. Foster and worked through my feelings about Bethany's betrayal. I reconnected with Maya, who understood completely because she'd experienced similar betrayals from her own extended family. I threw myself into preparing for trial with renewed focus. Mr. Garrison and I spent hours going over my testimony, practicing for the brutal cross-examination I'd face. It was grueling work, forcing me to relive painful memories and articulate them clearly for strangers. But it was also empowering. I was taking control of my own story, refusing to be silenced or shamed anymore. Meanwhile, Patricia couldn't leave well enough alone. She sent me a letter, a masterpiece of manipulation that alternated between tearful apologies and subtle blame. She said she was sorry if I felt hurt, that she'd been under so much stress caring for me that she'd made some mistakes, that we could work things out if I'd just drop this vendetta and come home. It was classic abuser tactics, the cycle of abuse playing out in written form. I didn't respond. Then she showed up at my apartment building, trying to get past the security door. I called the police. She was arrested for violating the restraining order that had been put in place after the courthouse incident. She violated it again 2 weeks later, showing up at my workplace. Another arrest. Each violation only strengthened our case and demonstrated her refusal to respect boundaries. She was digging her own grave, and I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The criminal trial began on a cold Monday morning in November. The courthouse was packed with people, more than I'd expected for a financial crime case. Apparently, the local media had picked up the story, framing it as a shocking case of maternal betrayal. I sat at the prosecutor's table with Mr. Garrison, who'd been appointed as a special prosecutor for this case given his expertise. Patricia sat across the aisle with her defense attorney, looking nothing like the screaming woman from the courthouse steps. She'd transformed herself into a picture of maternal suffering, wearing a conservative dress and minimal makeup, her face arranged in an expression of sad confusion, as if she couldn't understand why her beloved daughter was doing this to her. The prosecutor's opening statement laid out the case methodically. He described my accident, my vulnerability, Patricia's role as my caregiver, and the power of attorney I'd signed at 18. Then he detailed the theft, using charts and graphs to show exactly where my money had gone over 10 years. He presented the bank records showing luxury purchases, the emails proving conspiracy, the text messages revealing their true feelings about me. He called it what it was, a calculated, decade-long theft from a disabled woman by the people who should have protected her. Patricia's lawyer countered with a story about a devoted mother overwhelmed by the burden of caregiving, who'd made some accounting errors but always had my best interests at heart. He portrayed me as an ungrateful daughter, seeking revenge for imagined slights. The prosecution called witnesses over the next 3 days. Detective Morrison testified about the investigation and the evidence he'd uncovered. Mrs. Patterson from Social Security explained how my benefits worked and confirmed that all payments had gone to Patricia's account. Dr. Yoder testified about my competency and the forged medical records. Then they called Vincent. Had been granted immunity in exchange for his cooperation, and he looked miserable on the witness stand. Under oath, he admitted everything. He testified that Patricia had planned this from the beginning, that she'd seen my disability benefits as a windfall for the family, that she'd deliberately kept me isolated and dependent to maintain control. He repeated things his mother had said, including her statement that Clary's disability is our retirement fund. Watching Vincent testify, seeing him finally tell the truth even though it destroyed his mother, gave me a strange feeling. Not satisfaction exactly, more like validation. Everything I'd suspected, every moment I'd doubted my own perceptions, was being confirmed under oath in front of a judge and jury. Howard testified next, trying desperately to minimize his role and claim ignorance. But the prosecutor had his emails, his bank transfers, his signatures on documents. The cross-examination destroyed his claims of ignorance. Had been an active participant in the theft, and everyone in that courtroom knew it. Then it was my turn to testify. Walking to the witness stand felt like walking through fire. Patricia's eyes bore into me with such intensity I could feel it. I was sworn in and sat down, my hands gripping the arms of the chair to keep them from shaking. The prosecutor led me through my story gently but thoroughly. I described the accident, my injuries, my recovery. I explained how Patricia had convinced me to sign over power of attorney, how Shed controlled every aspect of my life, how Id believed her when she said there was no money. I talked about the isolation, the manipulation, the gaslighting. I described what it felt like to discover I'd been robbed of over $200,000 by my own mother. Then I read my impact statement. I'd written and rewritten it dozens of times, trying to capture 10 years of trauma in a few paragraphs. I talked about losing my 20s to isolation and lies, about struggling with suicidal thoughts when I believed I was worthless and burdensome. I described the depression, the self-doubt, the erosion of my identity. I explained that the theft wasn't just about money. It was about my mother stealing my autonomy, my dignity, my chance at independence. It was about being kept in a psychological prison while my family lived well on money meant for my survival. When I finished reading, the courtroom was silent. I looked up and saw several jurors wiping their eyes. Patricia's lawyer tried to shake my testimony on cross-examination. He questioned my memory, implying my pain medication affected my recollection of events. He tried to make Patricia's control sound like normal parental concern. He suggested I was exaggerating how isolated I'd been. But I'd prepared for this with Mr. Garrison, and I stayed calm and factual. For every question he asked, I had a clear answer backed by evidence. When he tried to paint Patricia as a loving mother, I asked him why a loving mother would call her daughter a cash cow in text messages. He had no response to that. The defense called character witnesses for Patricia, friends from church and neighbors who testified about what a nice person she seemed to be. But the prosecutor dismantled their testimony by showing them Patricia's social media posts from expensive vacations, photos of her designer purchases, evidence of a lifestyle funded by stolen money. He asked them if they'd known where that money came from. They hadn't. The defense rested without calling Patricia to testify, probably because they knew she'd be destroyed on cross-examination. After closing arguments, the jury deliberated for 4 hours. Those were the longest 4 hours of my life. When the jury returned, their faces were serious. The foreperson stood and read the verdict. Guilty on all counts. Theft over $100,000, exploitation of a disabled person, fraud, and identity theft. Patricia's face crumbled. She started screaming, not the calculated performance she'd been putting on for the jury, but genuine rage and panic. She lunged toward me across the aisle, screaming that this was all my fault, that she'd sacrificed everything for me, that I'd destroyed her life. Bailiffs grabbed her and dragged her from the courtroom while she continued shouting accusations and curses. The mask had finally come off completely, and everyone saw what I'd lived with for 10 years. Howard pleaded guilty separately a week later, agreeing to testify against Patricia at her sentencing hearing in exchange for a reduced sentence. Vincent's immunity deal meant he avoided prison but had to pay restitution and serve 5 years of probation. The civil trial followed quickly. With the criminal conviction, it was almost a formality. I sued for the full amount stolen plus punitive damages. Patricia's lawyer tried to claim she didn't have assets, but the prosecutor found them. Bank accounts, investments, the house that had been renovated with my money. The judge ordered everything seized. I won a judgment for $221,640 in restitution, plus $100,000 in punitive damages. Patricia's sentencing hearing was its own kind of drama. Her lawyer begged for leniency, claiming she'd made mistakes but wasn't a career criminal. The judge wasn't swayed. He said he'd reviewed the evidence thoroughly and found her conduct to be among the most callous he'd seen in 30 years on the bench. He said she'd psychologically tortured her disabled daughter for a decade while enriching herself, showing no remorse even when caught. He sentenced her to 8 years in state prison. Howard received 3 years. Patricia collapsed theatrically in the courtroom when the sentence was read, crying and wailing for sympathy. But the judge was unmoved. He said she'd shown her daughter no mercy for 10 years, and she'd received none from this court. 6 months after the trial ended, my life looked completely different. I'd received most of my back payments after legal fees and expenses, about $195,000. For the first time in my adult life, I had real financial security. I used the money wisely, investing most of it but using some to build the life I'd always wanted. I enrolled in online college courses, finally pursuing that graphic design degree I'd dreamed about. I bought a used car with hand controls, so I could drive myself places instead of depending on others. I moved into a better apartment, one that was fully accessible and in a neighborhood with coffee shops and parks and life happening around me. I funded ongoing therapy sessions with Dr. Foster because I knew healing would take time. My relationship with Walter deepened into something more meaningful than I could have imagined. He officially became my emergency contact, my medical proxy, the person I trusted most in the world. We had dinner together twice a week, either at his place or mine. He taught me about managing money, about investing and planning for the future. More importantly, he treated me like an adult capable of making my own decisions, something had been denied for so long. He never tried to control me or tell me what to do. He offered advice when I asked and supported my choices even when he might have chosen differently. That's what real family looked like. I reconnected with Dr. Yoder, and we developed a better pain management plan now that I could advocate for myself. My physical health improved significantly once I had proper care and wasn't living in constant stress. I joined the disability advocacy group that Lorraine ran, and I started speaking publicly about financial abuse. Sharing my story was terrifying at first, but it became empowering. Other survivors reached out to me, thanking me for giving them courage to come forward about their own situations. I realized my nightmare could serve a purpose, could help protect other vulnerable people from the same exploitation I'd endured. Maya and I decided to become roommates. We found a 2-bedroom apartment that worked for both our needs, and living with her transformed my daily life. She understood my limitations without pitying me. We celebrated each other's victories and supported each other through hard days. She became the sister I'd never actually had, chosen family in the truest sense. Through Maya, I met more people and started building a real social life. I even started dating, something I never thought I'd have the confidence to do. I met a man named Trevor at the support group, someone who also had a disability and understood my journey. Our relationship was built on honesty and mutual respect, two things I'd never had before. I published a blog post about my experience that went viral. Suddenly, media outlets wanted interviews. I appeared on local news programs and then national ones, telling my story and advocating for better protections for disabled adults. I testified before the state legislature about the need for stronger oversight of power of attorney arrangements and mandatory annual audits for accounts managed on behalf of disabled people. Some of my testimony was incorporated into a bill that eventually became law. Knowing my suffering might prevent others from going through the same thing gave me a sense of purpose I'd never had before. One day, I ran into Aunt Diane at the grocery store. She froze when she saw me, looking guilty and uncomfortable. She approached hesitantly and said she wanted to apologize, that she hadn't understood what was really happening, that she should have listened to me. I could see she genuinely felt bad about how Shed treated me. I told her I appreciated the apology and that I forgave her for not knowing the truth. But I also told her I couldn't have a relationship with her. Forgiveness didn't mean reconciliation. I'd learned that distinction in therapy. I wished her well and walked away, and it felt good to set that boundary without guilt. Patricia wrote me letters from prison, dozens of them over the months. They alternated between manipulative apologies and vicious blame, the same pattern Shed always used. Sometimes Shed write about how sorry she was and how much she loved me. Other letters accused me of ruining her life and insisted everything was my fault. I didn't respond to any of them. Mr. Garrison advised me to save them in case she violated parole terms in the future, but I didn't need to engage with her manipulation anymore. She had no power over me now. That realization was liberating in ways I couldn't fully express. The day I completed my first online course and received my certificate was a major milestone. I'd earned an A, and more importantly, I'd proven to myself that I was capable and intelligent, despite years of being told otherwise. Walter attended my online graduation ceremony via video call, and I could see him crying with pride on the screen. Maya threw a small party at our apartment. Trevor brought flowers. Lorraine came with a card and encouraging words. Mr. Garrison showed up with champagne. Dr. Foster sent a congratulatory message. These people, my chosen family, celebrated my achievement in a way my blood family never had. I found myself thinking about the past 10 years differently now. Yes, I'd lost time. Yes, I'd suffered trauma that would take years to fully heal. But I'd also survived. I'd found the courage to escape, to fight back, to reclaim my life. I'd discovered strength I didn't know I had. I'd learned to trust my own judgment and set boundaries. I'd built a life based on authenticity instead of manipulation. I'd turned my pain into purpose by helping others. Those weren't small things. Those were victories. I spent a lot of time reflecting on what family meant. I used to think it was about blood, about the people you were born to, about obligation and loyalty regardless of how they treated you. But I learned that real family is about something deeper. Real family shows up when you need them. Real family tells you hard truths because they care about your well-being more than their comfort. Real family celebrates your freedom instead of trying to steal it. Real family earns trust through consistent actions, not demands it because of shared DNA. By that definition, I had more family now than I'd ever had growing up. I looked around my apartment at the life I'd built, at the evidence of my independence and growth. There were textbooks from my courses on the desk, photos of Maya and me laughing together on the wall, Trevor's jacket draped over the chair from his visit last night, my own car keys on the counter, representing freedom to go wherever I wanted, bank statements in my own name showing money I'd earned and managed, therapy appointment reminders on my phone for sessions that were helping me heal. This was my life now, built by me, controlled by me, lived on my terms. Some people would never understand why I pressed charges against my own mother. They'd say family is everything, that I should have forgiven and moved on, that airing dirty laundry in court was vindictive and cruel. But those people didn't understand a fundamental truth. You can't heal in the same environment that broke you. You can't recover from abuse while your abusers still have access to you. You can't build a healthy life on a foundation of lies and manipulation. Sometimes the only way to survive is to walk away completely, to burn bridges that should never have been built in the first place, to choose yourself even when the whole world tells you you're wrong. And once you make that choice, once you finally put yourself first and refuse to accept mistreatment even from family, something powerful happens. You realize you were never the broken one. You were never the problem. You were never worthless or burdensome or incompetent. Those were lies told by people who needed you to believe them to maintain control. The truth is that you were strong enough to survive impossible circumstances, brave enough to stand up to people who should have protected you, and resilient enough to build a new life from the ashes of the old one. That realization changes everything. I closed my laptop after submitting my final assignment for the semester and walked over to the window. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Maya called from the kitchen asking if I wanted Thai food or pizza for dinner. Trevor texted asking about our plans for the weekend. My phone showed a message from Lorraine about speaking at an advocacy event next month. This was my life now, full of ordinary moments and real connections and genuine care. It wasn't perfect. I still had hard days when the trauma caught up with me. But it was mine. Every single piece of it was authentically, beautifully, freely mine. I thought about that moment in Walter's hotel room when Head asked if I'd ever seen my bank statements. One question. That's all it took to start unraveling 10 years of lies. One person caring enough to look beyond the surface and ask the obvious question nobody else had bothered to ask. One moment of clarity that changed everything. I'd spent so long wishing someone would save me, not realizing I'd have to save myself. But Walter had given me the tools and the courage to do exactly that. Had shown me that freedom was possible, that I deserved better, that my life could be different. Now I was paying that forward, using my voice to help others trapped in similar situations, advocating for changes in the system, refusing to let my suffering be meaningless. If sharing my story saved even one person from 10 years of exploitation, then maybe everything I'd been through had a purpose. Maybe pain could be transformed into power, trauma into advocacy, victimhood into survivorship. That transformation wasn't easy or linear. Some days I still felt broken. But more and more, I felt whole. So that's my story. The story of how my family stole my disability payments for a decade. how my grandfather asked one question that changed everything, and how I fought back to reclaim my life. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone you trusted? Have you had to choose between family loyalty and your own well-being? What would you have done in my situation? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel for more real stories about survival, justice, and finding strength in impossible circumstances. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that they're not alone, that abuse disguised as love is still abuse, and that choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. Thank you for listening to my story, for witnessing my journey, and for being part of the community that makes speaking out possible. To everyone still trapped in situations like I was, please know this: you deserve better, your feelings are valid, and freedom is possible. Don't wait 10 years like I did. Ask questions. Demand answers. Trust your instincts. And remember that family isn't who you're born to, it's who shows up when you need them most. Take care of yourselves, set boundaries without guilt, and never let anyone convince you that abuse is love. Until next time.